I want to start with the premise that might sound a little abstract, but it actually dictates how we experience our hobbies.
Okay.
We tend to think that language is just a tool, a tool we use to describe reality. You see a thing, you name it. But what if it's the other way around?
You mean the words we use are shaping the culture?
Exactly. And what if those words are being chosen for us by, economic forces we aren't even aware of?
It sounds like we're about to discuss Orwell, but I have a feeling we're actually talking about video games.
We are. We're talking about the specific vocabulary of gaming. Words like gameplay, fun, and playability. Because there is a massive new study out by researchers Quentin Alvarez and Thierry Lafouge that suggests the way we talk about games, it isn't organic.
No.
It's the result of a 40-year linguistic conquest.
Conquest is a strong word,
Yeah.
but when you look at the data they've compiled, it's hard to argue against it. This is a lexicometric study, which basically means they treated words as data points. They analyzed over 1,500 English magazines and about 1,000 French magazines, and the time frame is huge, from 1977 all the way to 2019.
And just to give people a sense of the scale here, they weren't just, running a search on some database. A lot of this involved going through physical archives.
Oh, yeah.
Magazines like Tilt, Joystick, Computer and Video Games, Retro Gamer. I mean, they were literally counting how often words appeared across 4 decades just to map how terminology travels across borders.
Right. And the picture that emerges is one of profound cultural imperialism. The study tracks how English terminology didn't just influence French gaming culture, it colonized it.
But not instantly.
No, not even logically. It happened through a very specific economic mechanism that created this bizarre time lag in how we speak.
Okay, so let's start with the heavyweight champion of this study, the word gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a gamer today, or even just read tech news, gameplay is the default. It's the noun. It's the interactive part of the game, not the graphics or the story. It feels so permanent.
It does now. But the data shows that gameplay as a single compound word is actually a relatively recent victor. If you go back to the English magazines of the late 70s and early 80s, the word gameplay barely existed in the form we use today.
The chart shows a split. Between 1977 and 1983, about 75% of the usage was gameplay, 2 separate words.
Right, it was a description of an action. The gameplay is slow. It was a noun phrase.
But alongside that, there is another contender that, for a while, completely dominated the 80s, playability.
Yeah.
I honestly haven't heard anyone use the word playability in a serious review in years. But according to this, it was the word for a whole decade.
It was. In English magazines, playability peaked at over 40% usage in the mid-80s. It was the standard. You had graphics, sound, and playability.
So why did it die? Because looking at the graph, it didn't just fade away.
It crashed.
It crashed. By the late 90s, it's under 5%. Did we just decide it sounded clunky?
I think it's deeper than just phonetics. I mean, think about what playability implies. It's a passive quality of the software. Is this playable?
It sounds like a technical question.
Exactly. Does the joystick work? Is the code broken? It feels very binary.
Whereas gameplay implies a system, a loop.
Gameplay implies the nuanced interaction between the player's input and the game's rules. As games moved from simple arcade tests to, complex RPGs in the 90s, playability just felt too shallow. It felt like a word for a product.
And gameplay was a word for an experience.
And by 2019, gameplay accounts for 90% of occurrences in English media. It became the monolith.
Okay, so that makes sense. English speakers evolved their language to match the complexity of the medium, but the study gets really controversial when we look at what happened in France, because France had a perfectly good word for this.
They did. Jouabilité.
Jouabilité, a direct translation of playability. And in the 80s, this word was untouchable in France.
95% dominance.
So if you opened a French gaming magazine in 1985, you would not see the English word gameplay. You would only see jouabilité.
And this is where we see the invasion. Starting around 1995, the English word gameplay begins to appear in French texts. It starts as a trickle, maybe 25% of articles.
But then it just explodes.
Within a single decade, by the 2001-2006 cycle, gameplay has skyrocketed to over 90% usage in French magazines.
And jouabilité collapses.
It's decimated. By the end of the study, jouabilité is hovering around 8 or 10%. The native French word was effectively replaced by the English import.
Now, I can hear the counter-argument already. Maybe gameplay is just a better word.
Right.
We just established that in English, gameplay replaced playability because it was more specific. Maybe the French just realized the same thing.
That is the assumption, but the researchers point out a critical nuance here. Jouabilité and gameplay are not perfect synonyms. Jouabilité in French is broad. It can apply to board games, card games, sports. It refers to the potential for something to be played. Gameplay, as it evolved, became specific to the computing medium. It refers to the rules as instantiated by code.
So by adopting the English word, the French were kind of admitting that their own language didn't have a word for digital play.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
But the researchers argued this wasn't some intellectual choice. It was an economic inevitability. And this brings us to what they call the follower effect.
This was the part of the paper that just blew my mind. They didn't just find that the French copied the English.
No.
They found that they copied them on a delay.
A very specific delay. They calculated a correlation coefficient of 0.78 between the trends, which is statistically very high. But the curves are not aligned. The French shift happens roughly 1 to 2 economic cycles after the English shift.
And an economic cycle is about 6 years, right? Like a console generation?
Roughly, yeah. So we're talking about a 6 to 12-year lag.
So playability dies in England in the late 80s.
And jouabilité dies in France in the late 90s.
Why the lag? I mean, if it was just about using the cool new word, wouldn't French journalists want to use it immediately? Why wait a decade?
Because it wasn't about coolness at first. It was about supply chains.
Supply chains.
You have to understand the business model of these magazines in the 80s and 90s. Writing original reviews is expensive. You hire a writer, buy the game, give them days to play it.
Right, then you have to edit the copy.
But translating an article that was already published in a UK magazine, that is cheap. The study notes that early French magazines, like the first issue of Tilt, were up to 50% translated content from English sources.
So the French magazines were effectively just English magazines wearing a fake mustache.
For a huge chunk of their content, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are a translator working on a deadline and you see gameplay in the English text, and you know jouabilité doesn't quite capture the nuance, eventually you just leave it as gameplay.
And then the French readers see gameplay, they start using it, then the French writers start using it because the readers expect it, and boom, the native word is obsolete.
Exactly. But the lag exists because it takes time for that volume of translation to saturate the culture. It takes a generation of journalists growing up, reading the translations, to then start writing original content using the borrowed terms. The French were suiveurs, followers.
They were echoing a standard that had been set in London or New York a decade earlier.
Right.
It makes you wonder if they even realized they were using an outdated concept. Like if the French were clinging to jouabilité in the 90s, thinking it was the translation of gameplay, but English speakers had already moved on from playability. Were the French unknowingly living in a linguistic time capsule?
That's the implication.
Yeah.
They were mimicking a signal that had already changed at the source.
But surely this goes both ways. I mean, French theory, French cinema, they're huge. Surely some French gaming terms made it back across the channel into English.
The researchers looked for that. They specifically tracked the word ludic.
Ludic, from ludique in French, the adjective for play.
Right. In French, ludic is a staple. It peaked at nearly 40% usage in French magazines in the early 90s. It's a standard, slightly academic, but common word.
And in English?
Zero.
Zero. Like literally zero.
The English corpus was described as waterproof against the word. There was essentially no penetration at all.
But wait, we use ludic in English now, don't we? I mean, ludonarrative dissonance, that's a huge buzzword in game design essays.
In extremely niche academic circles, yes. But in the consumer magazines, the Game Informers, the PC gamers of the world, it does not exist. And the rejection of the word is actually, well, it's quite hostile.
Hostile. How can a language be hostile to a word?
Well, look at the case of Homo Ludens, the seminal book by Johann Huizinga, written in 1938. It's the Bible of game studies.
Men the player, right.
In the original foreword, Huizinga apologizes for using the word ludique. He admits it's a loan from French psychology, that it doesn't strictly exist in Latin, but he needs it. He acknowledges the French influence.
He's giving credit.
But when the book was translated into English, that sentence was removed. The word ludique was scrubbed from the text.
They censored the French influence.
The translators or editors just refused to adopt it. And it speaks to a broader cultural resistance, I think, in the Anglosphere. In French culture, intellectualizing a hobby is seen as validating it. Calling Mario ludique elevates it.
Right, the French love their theory.
But in English and American culture, there's this anti-intellectual streak when it comes to entertainment. We don't want to call it ludic. We want to call it fun.
Yeah.
We resist terms that sound academic or pretentious, so while French was absorbent, soaking up gameplay and score and game over, English was repellent. It took nothing back.
That distinction, intellectual versus emotional, that actually leads perfectly into the final battleground the study covers.
The battle for fun.
Yes, fun versus amusant. Now, fun is the ultimate English buzzword. It's short, it's punchy, it sells. The data shows fun hitting 93% usage in English magazines by the early 90s. It just destroyed older words like amusing.
Amusing. Sounds so detached, doesn't it? I found this amusing.
Right, like you're looking at a painting.
Fun is visceral.
So what happened in France? Did fun conquer amusant the same way gameplay conquered jouabilité?
It tried. Fun surged in French magazines. It went from under 5% in the late 70s to nearly 50% by the late 90s. A massive invasion. But it stalled. Unlike gameplay, which went all the way to 90%, fun plateaued around 32% in the modern era. And amusant survived. It's still used in about 30–40% of cases.
So the French language managed to hold the line on amusant. Why? Why save that word but let jouabilité die?
Well, this is where we have to look at the difference between a noun and an adjective. Gameplay is a technical noun. It describes a mechanism. And technical terms are easy to standardize globally because they need to be precise.
Like Wi-Fi or email, you don't translate those.
Exactly. But fun and amusant are adjectives. They describe an emotion, a subjective experience, and you can't just replace a native emotional word with a foreign marketing term that easily.
Right.
Amusant carries a nuance in French. It can mean funny, entertaining, diverting, that fun doesn't quite capture.
Fun feels very American. It feels like a sticker on the box. Amusant feels more like a critique.
Precisely. And the data reflects that. The French writers kept amusant for their critical analysis, even while they adopted fun for the headlines. It shows that while the economic pressure to standardize technical language is overwhelming, our cultural attachment to emotional language is much stronger.
So bringing us all back to the big picture, we have a clear case of linguistic colonization driven by economics. The English terms won because the English and American markets had the money, the magazines, the consoles.
And the translation budgets.
Right. But the study ends in 2019, and the researchers note a tiny, interesting blip at the very end. The one-way street might be cracking.
Just a hairline fracture. They mentioned that in the 2013-2019 cycle, jouabilité stopped falling. It stabilized. And fun dropped slightly.
What's changing?
The internet. And specifically, the rise of global studios. The study mentions Ankama, the French studio behind Dofus.
Oh, huge game.
Ankama is French, but they produce content directly in English for a global audience. When a non-native speaker writes in English, they don't follow the rules of the dominant culture as strictly.
So we might reintroduce a Frenchism or something into their English text?
Exactly. So instead of English magazines exporting words to France, we might have French developers writing in English and potentially polluting or enriching the global language.
Ideally.
Ideally. But we have to be realistic about the scale. For 40 years, the flow was overwhelmingly one way. And even with the internet, the standard English terminology is now so entrenched that it's almost impossible to dislodge.
It really makes you rethink the whole global village concept. We thought the internet would create this melting pot of language.
Yeah.
Instead, it seems like it just accelerated the dominance of whoever had the biggest megaphone back in 1985.
Economics usually wins. The language of the trade becomes the language of the thought. If you want to sell your game, you have to describe its gameplay, not its jouabilité.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener. We've spent this time looking back at how playability died and gameplay took over. But it happened on that 6 to 12-year delay.
Yes.
That means for a decade, French gamers were using a word they thought was current, while English speakers had already moved on. They were living in the past without even knowing it.
And today, the magazine cycle is dead. Information travels instantly. But does that mean the lag is gone, or has it just changed form?
Exactly. I mean, think about the words being born right now on Twitch or in Discord servers. The slang of Gen Alpha, Riz, Skibidi, whatever the gaming equivalent is next week. If you are learning those words from a streamer who is learning them from a subreddit, where are you in the chain?
You might still be a follower.
We might all be using words that are already dead in the room where they were invented. Thanks for diving deep with us.